The MK Legacy Collection has come out, and unfortunately, it is not a resounding success. I was really hoping it would be. That'd be this big rallying cry, and it would be so successful, and everybody would love it so much that we would inevitably get a Legacy Collection 2 with all of the PS2 games and maybe versus DC. It's possible that financially it'll still work out that way, but in terms of reception, we got kind of a really weak early reception here. You're watching Rayl Deal Games, and as you all know, I really prize single-player content in games. I'm one of the only creators, I think, who talks about single-player content in fighting games on a regular basis. Whenever I make a fighting game video, it's one of the things that I do talk about a lot. And as somebody who goes into these games with that kind of want, the collection was actually mostly fine, with a giant asterisk next to it. There were some bugs. Once those are fixed, I personally am going to be Gucci, really. However, there is an expectation with this game that it was going to have online modes. The trailer kind of alluded to that fact, that there was going to be a way to play with other people. If they want to spin it as them referring to local play, I'm not really going to buy that one personally, because when you say play together in this day and age, that means online modes. And for this game to truly capture the spirit of the arcades, it needed to have them. I'm a big game preservationist. I love games being preserved, but I also really like games being preserved with their intended experience. And for you to replicate the arcades, I don't know how you do that without online modes. Now, as a baseline, you need to be able to play with your friends. You need ranked. In this day and age, you also need crossplay. And that's what a lot of people have said. But I also think that this game needs King of the Hill mode, where you can get a bunch of people together to watch matches and then jump in. That's the arcade experience in my mind. Whenever a game launches without King of the Hill or something like that, it's a mode that, for me at least, I am missing a lot, because that is the arcade experience in my opinion. Now, as a big single-player content enjoyer for fighting games, I think it's important to say that I would never personally suggest that's the only thing a fighting game needs. That's just unrealistic. And while I don't buy the cope that they can't make the modes like they did back in the 6th generation, the PS2 era, it is very important that they have online offerings. Fighting games were the original esport, if you don't count things like Pac-Man and Tetris, I suppose. And unfortunately, the MK Legacy Collection has kind of the reverse problem, where it has all of the single-player stuff you would want from these games, but it doesn't have the online modes. And that's kind of antithetical to the spirit of the games themselves, because this era of MK really wasn't single-player heavy. It was designed to be played with somebody else. That's why they are designed the way they are. It's like if they re-released MK Deception and it didn't have an online mode, I think it would cause some stink, but really the intention of Deception was primarily single-player. That's not to defend that, but at least there, it wouldn't sting as badly as it does here, where these games are very clearly designed with that multiplayer in mind. And you really cannot replicate the original experience of arcade-era MK without online modes or some way to get together and play with people. Any arcade game needs a mode like that, especially to replicate the experience. Now, that one I think is pretty much the biggest issue. There are other issues, but that's like the primary issue. And so I want to get into some of the more kind of corner case issues with this collection that I wish we could have seen some differences on. And also my biggest kind of letdown of the collection as well. So the big thing I want to talk about first is MK2's difficulty. The collection actually replicates the original's difficulty, which is something I like, because I like games being able to be played in their original iterations. However, I kind of wish they had like some kind of option select, like how Capcom did with the Juggernaut bug in MVC2, where it fixed it for an experience. So if you want an experience that has no bugs, you have it, but then also they allow you to opt into it as well to play the game in its original state. I feel like they should have done that with MK2 with the AI. They should have provided the AI as it was back then so people could experience the suffering the single player MK2 players did in the ages of antiquity. But then I also think they should have kind of maybe made an MK2 that did not just cheat all the time. And I think it's very important to remember with like difficulty modes in very early 90s fighting games, it's kind of less of a problem for the late 90s, like, you know, Soul Edge, Soul Calibur, and late Dead or Alive and stuff. It's a little bit of a lesser issue with those, but early 90s fighting games, it's like where the difficulty modes were pretty much just a cheating slider for the AI. It was like, how often do you want the AI to cheat? Do you want us to jump up the percentage and make them cheat more, or do you want them to cheat less? Which I think is why the optimal single player experience is actually a very low difficulty, because it decreases the amount of time that the AI is going to cheat. And unfortunately, MK2, for some reason, and it's not just MK2, it's a well-known fact that fighting games at the time all cheated, but MK2 really stands out as a big, massive cheater. And it's very unfortunate that there's no way to play MK2 that doesn't have that very awful cheating to it. As is, the game is better than the American version of Super Turbo when it comes to cheating, but it is still terrible, and I really do think this is something that they should have considered. Maybe, and I honestly, I'm not a programmer, so it's possible that it's impossible to fix this, but it's something that I do wish that they had maybe looked into, or maybe at least justified why they couldn't fix this particular element of MK2, just to make it feel better, because the single player for MK2 is quite poor as a result of this particular feature of it. Now, the biggest complaint I have, and the reason why the title of this video is the way it is, like, the fact that it doesn't have online already contributes to the title. That's part of that 50% that's missing, for sure. But the other thing that I really am, like, kind of sore about is that this collection is incomplete. You know, it's not like they said something was going to be in here that isn't, but I really wanted all of these ports, and this is kind of maybe a me problem, but I really wanted the Saturn ports, I wanted the N64 version of Trilogy, I also wanted gold. Now, they went on record, I believe, saying that they couldn't get gold for some reason or another. Now, personally, except for the Saturn, I have all of the hardware necessary to play these. I don't have all the software, but I do have all of the hardware necessary. It's just that for a complete collection, I think they needed all of these different versions. And there's some elements of MK history and design that you just lose if you don't include, say, like the N64 version of MK4 or the N64 version of Trilogy, because both are very unique in some ways, and the N64 version of MK4 is a very unique version of that. It's kind of like the N64 RE2, where that version of RE2 is so different from PS1 RE2 that it's something I really wish we could get both of those, and it's kind of the same problem. So considering I knew personally what I was going for, what I was getting, I got what I paid for, except for the bugs. I didn't pay for the bugs. I don't want those. And I hope that they add online, because I was actually interested in playing online. It's something that I personally could take or leave, but it's going to be a deal breaker for a lot of people, and I honestly think it's perfectly fine if it was a deal breaker for you, because that really is a big problem with the collection and something that I myself would criticize, even though I don't plan to use that mode at all, pretty much. But in terms of preservation, I think this collection was maybe like 50% successful based on what's actually included, much like how the 30th anniversary collection for Street Fighter was. As a little tangent here, why does Capcom just absolutely refuse to release the PS1 and Dreamcast ports of Alpha 3? Everybody wants to play World Tour mode. Come on. Now, as anyone who's followed the channel for a long time can attest, I love vintage games. I love playing old games. I play games of all genres and franchises. So it does disappoint me personally when a game comes out that should be doing game preservation to the absolute max and it doesn't. Now, once again, they never said they were going to do this. So I'm not here to say that they're terrible, a terrible company for not providing this particular element of the collection, but it is something that I want to talk about for me personally, that nobody else is talking about. I want to talk about it. You see, to me, video games are art. That's not like a crazy take. A lot of people have that take. But what that means for me is that they need to preserve this art form. It's not just MK that has this problem, as Final Fantasy, my favorite gaming franchise, has a huge problem in terms of preserving older versions of its franchise. You see, every single Final Fantasy port, every port of every mainline Final Fantasy game is kind of very different. They have different content, they have different looks, they have different vibes, and unfortunately, it's kind of like MK did the same thing that happened with Final Fantasy here, where they gave us like a version, maybe two versions of something, but they didn't give us all the versions. Now I understand that it's very possible that there's maybe lost code, unfortunately, and things like that. But in my kind of like happiness zone, you know, in the place that brings me joy, I am able to play every version of all of these games from the biggest and most important gaming franchises throughout history. And the reason why I say this is like a 50% success for preservation is that we're missing some really big things here, honestly. I want to take a second, I want to run through the excluded ports that I think really should have been here. Now, I'm not going to go through every single port because there's more ports than what I'm about to talk about that aren't included, but these are the ones I really wanted to see. Now, I'm not going to go through every single missing port. I'm just going to talk about some of the ports I really wish we could have seen that aren't here. The DOS versions of MK 1992 and MK2, I would have loved to see these because DOS runs very differently than like a lot of console ports at the time would have. I've actually never played the DOS versions of these games, so I would have loved to see how the DOS version plays in comparison to the SNES and the Genesis. This early 90s era, every single game was very different from one another. Alien 3 on Genesis versus Alien 3 on SNES, perfect example. You look at the two versions of MK 1992 on Genesis versus SNES, they're very different too. There's some kind of like input delay at the start of every match in SNES 1992 MK. And this is something I've noticed even on original hardware, which I plug in sometimes to play. I bought all these games in preparation for a video series. I would have liked to see the DOS versions. In terms of MK3, I would have loved to see the PS1 version. That one, I feel like, as soon as we jumped to like discs and stuff, games changed actually quite significantly, a little bit more than you might think. So I would have liked to see that. I would have liked to see the Genesis version of UMK3, because the Genesis ports versus the SNES ports for things, very, very different, so I would have liked to see both. But really, the big missing ones are between MK Trilogy and MK4. With Trilogy, we don't have the N64 version or the Sega Saturn version. The N64 version is really the one that I want to talk about because there's pretty big finisher differences with like Nightwolf between N64 Trilogy and PS1 Trilogy. And it would have been nice to be able to have everything, every finisher from MK history, all in one little package from the arcade era. And unfortunately, missing out on the N64 version means there are some finishers that you won't be able to see in this collection from the arcade era. And for MK4, this is another, I think, a very egregious loss here. We have the arcade version, but we don't have any of the console ports. And just like Trilogy, the console ports between the different versions of MK4, they're quite significant. Like the changes are quite significant between them. N64 MK4 is especially significant because of the way the N64 works. They actually couldn't play a lot of the cutscenes present in the arcade and PS1 versions of MK4 because the hardware just did not work like that, and it led to some very, very interesting versions of MK4 endings, and the attract mode is very different as well, so it would have been nice to be able to see that there. And also, really the biggest exclusion is Gold. Gold added more of the cooler endings, it has more characters, it has balancing changes. That one, like I said before, they explained, but I would have loved to have seen it. And when it comes to ports, I don't think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to begrudge missing ports of like Mythologies or Special Forces, because I think as long as the spin-offs are playable, that's fine, but really it's the mainline titles that we really need all of the versions of, in my opinion. And I know it's not feasible to have everything preserved, but I would have liked like the very significant versions of each game be preserved. So if you wanted to argue with me and say, well, the DOS versions aren't special enough to preserve, fine, whatever. But the N64 versions of Trilogy and MK4 are worth preserving because they are so different from other versions of MK4. If you wanted to pull hairs and say the PS1 version of MK4 is not different enough from the arcade to preserve, whatever, fine. I'm not going to argue on that one, but what about Gold? Gold should be here. And so I really do think we needed all of these different versions, especially just for Trilogy and MK4. And that's really where I think a lot of the preservation effort here and has kind of failed. And I understand they probably had a tight development window and things like that, but with collections like these, this is where I want to see those things return. This is where I want all of these things to come back. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to impact me personally that much because I was already planning to do a long analysis series on the entire franchise, looking at every different port that I could get my little fingers on, from MK 1992 all the way to Versus DC. At least I wasn't really planning on jumping over to 9 quite yet, just for time. I wasn't sure if I was gonna have time to do that. And I guess the lack of these, and also kind of the shoddy performance in some of the elements of the MK Legacy Collection, actually gives me more of a reason to do that. So later this month, I'm going to start making videos for MK 1992, maybe December. It's either going to be late this month or early December. And I am planning to play the collection a ton because it is going to be the only way that I can have access to the arcade versions to review. So this port's going to work for me, but I'm really not going to argue with anyone that's really mad about this particular collection because the lack of ports, the bugs, and the multiplayer being gone are all very terrible aspects of this collection that should not have happened. And I really hope that they can get it fixed. I hope that this collection is financially successful because I do want a 3D era collection. I do want Shaolin Monks, Deception, Deadly Alliance, Armageddon, and, you know, Versus DC is not a 3D era game, but Versus DC all in one package. I would love all 5 of those games, and maybe Unchained. That's the, you know, the PSP port of Deception, all 6 of those games. I would love to have them all in one package for you to buy, and I really feel like the only way that's going to happen is if this is successful, and that's where kind of the problems of this collection are a big raw deal for me personally, because I want those, and because they didn't provide the product that they should have, I might be denied those, which kind of sucks. And so, you know, once they get everything fixed, once they get those online modes in, then this is something that I think I could recommend. But as is right now, even for the game preservationists, if you already have all of these things outside of this collection, I don't think you need this right now, not for $50. And it's a darn shame because I really, really wanted this to be a massive success. I was really chomping at the bit for this collection, and even though I'm gonna have a lot of fun playing it, it's kind of a bittersweet type of fun, you know what I mean? So I wanted to put out something about it because I've been waiting for this for so long. Initially, this was going to be my Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 review slot, but I pushed that to next week, and I hope you guys don't begrudge me that, because this was just something I felt like I really needed to talk about just very quickly in a kind of an informal video. I initially wasn't going to do this at all, but the lacking ports was something that I didn't think I saw a lot of people talking about. And I also didn't see a lot of like pro single player people criticizing the collection. In fact, it seemed like the people who are the single player gamers were out here defending the lack of content and the poor product that this is, which, you know, the whole reason I talked about wanting that second collection is because if this product isn't a good product and doesn't sell, then you don't actually get the real good single player games. And so it's kind of like short-sightedness, in my opinion, to praise this for what it is, when it really is a letdown for a great swath of the potential player base who really would have played this and got it day one and really wanted to, maybe, if the online modes were there or if more of the ports were there. So it's kind of a bittersweet thing for me because I'm enjoying what I'm playing personally, but I also would say buyers beware. You don't have some of the things that people are looking for from this collection, and hopefully you get them soon. I hope you do, but it's possible. Who knows with the corporate world, right? And guys, I'm going to throw it back to you now. I want to hear your impressions of the Legacy Collection so far. I understand a lot of us are very disappointed about the lack of online features and things like that. But are you enjoying it anyway? Are you going to pick it up once those online features come out? Let's have a discussion in the comments below. And while you're down there, consider smashing that like button, subscribing, and hyping up the video. I'm a very, very small creator. Would love to be able to make more videos for you all. And every like, sub, and comment helps me get closer to the ultimate goal. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you for keeping it real with Rayl Deal Games, and I'll see you all in the next video.